My name is Mark Campbell, and I'm one of the postdoctoral fellows this year, one of the 2 Marks this year in the Improvisation Community and Social Practice program. This is the other Mark. You're known to everyone, I imagine.
To some of us. I'm Mark Labor. I'm the other Mark. We're stereo this year.
Yeah, Mark and stereo. So today we have, I guess it's the beginning of this year's reading series, Thinking Spaces, and we have Dr. Michael MacDonald with us today. And I'll quickly read the bio a little bit, and then we can go in. Dr. Michael MacDonald is an ethnomusicologist of popular music at the University of Alberta. In 2010-2011, he held a postdoctoral teaching and research fellowship at Canadian Folk Music and is currently a postdoctoral researcher at the U of A Center for Teaching and Learning, where he is working on a research paper that brings critical pedagogy to popular music education in an approach that he calls critical listening. Critical listening is an exploration of listening for democratic arts education practice. This project explores the development of critical listening as an already culturally embedded learning model in an oral cultural practice that may be complemented by critical pedagogy for the development of students' critical consciousness. This is a continuation of previous research which focused on community music and collective action and its interface with the industrialization of music culture. Michael is particularly interested in the roles music and aesthetics play in the production of subjectivity, belonging, critical awareness, individual and social health, ecology, and the creation of more democratic, equitable, and just communities. Dr. MacDonald teaches courses in the history of popular music, the music industry, urban musicology, and folk music from an engaged and critical orientation, drawing from critical pedagogy, aesthetics, music psychology, and ethnomusicology to accompany students in the development of socially oriented critical thinking skills. Michael has published articles on folk music, music and ecology, and pop music pedagogy. In 2009, Michael founded Sound and Music, an electronic journal, in an effort to provide his popular music students with an opportunity to gain practical and professional experience in music criticism, media, and critical writing. The blog has more than 20,000 readers each year. So welcome, Dr. John.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. I'm really excited to be here speaking with you about soundings in places and the urban experience, and this is something that has become increasingly close to my heart and increasingly confusing and difficult. So I'm looking forward to the conversation that's going to follow. Part of what's confusing, I think, for me as an ethnomusicologist is beginning with the question I talked about earlier this afternoon, exactly what is urban ethnomusicology, which is something that I began to ponder. Is there such thing as an urban ethnomusicology? If it is, what does it look like? What are the things that would be the focus? And what kind of questions would you be asking, and what kind of methodological apparatus would you use to attempt to answer those? At the same time, the Decentralized Dance Party came to my attention on Facebook. They were organizing one of their early tours a little over a year ago, and I looked at it and it was fantastic. I followed them to the website, I read through the website, and I published over the next couple of days a blog post talking about the connection of contemporary anarchist philosophy with the Decentralized Dance Party. Published it, and the Decentralized Dance Party, Gary, who I'm going to show you a photo of in a second, sent me an email a couple of days later. I said, that's exactly it. Can I take that and put it on our website to help advertise what it is that we're doing? So that created the kind of back and forth conversation that happened at the beginning. That conversation is continuing. And this presentation is going to be linked to the Decentralized Dance Party website, and this is going to make up part of the exploration of what the Decentralized Dance Party is in a, call it continuously deepening kind of collaboration with the people that are making it, the people that are discussing it, and the people that are doing it, right? And which it really is everybody that's involved. The Decentralized Dance Party is a funny relationship between the curator, Tom and Gary. This is Gary, and this is Gary's mug. And the art piece. We're familiar with installation art. I can't find a word for this exactly, except we might as well call it extallation art. This is a type of art installation where everybody that's there is part of the art piece, and the kind of the terrains upon which the art piece is engaged has subjective, environmental, and social terrains. All of those happening simultaneously. Tom and Gary, let me tell you a little bit about the Decentralized Dance Party. I'll let them tell you a little bit about the Decentralized Dance Party. Here's their most recent trailer.
A DDP is a portable FM transmitter, an iPod, hundreds of battery-powered boomboxes, and you, thousands of you.
So the first leg of the Decentralized Dance Party 2011 Strictly Business Tour has just come to its conclusion. The last event was in Calgary. This is a photograph towards the end of the event, somewhere in the vicinity of, I don't know, beyond 2,000 or 3,000 people. This stretches over about that far and goes well down beyond the trees. So you can see exactly how many people that is. This is essentially how it works. Tom and Gary show up with an iPad wired through a game glove into an FM transmitter that they carry on their back that broadcasts a playlist. They also show up with more than 100 battery-powered boomboxes that they distribute to whoever wants them. They just line them up and people just grab them. Everybody tunes into the party frequency, which is marked on the boomboxes, and you have a mobile sound system. That's incredibly loud. You have hundreds of boomboxes collectively tuned into the same frequency, produces much more volume in a much more distributed way than even the largest concert sound systems that I've been around. So what you end up with is essentially some cross between a concert and all of the volume and fun of a kind of a large show, but in a completely decentralized and therefore absolutely portable situation. What's important about the portability of it and the decentralized aspect of it, and Tom and Gary, their role is as a curator, okay? You could call it a facilitator, but that would kind of reduce the artistic and aesthetic exploration that they're experimenting with. As you can see from the trailer, I mean, engaging in the Hollywood trailer construction, Hollywood editing. You'll never see Tom or Gary doing anything with the Decentralized Dance Party that's not in the official Decentralized Dance Party, tour theme. This is the Strictly Business tour. You see his tag says supervisor. He has his Strictly Business mug. He has a Strictly Business jacket and the glasses, and everybody was asked to wear business attire to the Strictly Business tour. So everybody show up with briefcases and mugs, and this is how it works. They create Facebook party notices at different cities that they're planning on going to, inviting people to show up. People sign up, thousands of people. They send out party invitations at, I don't even know how many cities they started out with, and they decide which cities they're going to go to based on how many party acceptances they get. So they ended up boiling the list down to the places where they had more than probably 2,000 or 3,000 people. Then they started a Kickstarter campaign and funded the entire thing through crowdfunding. So the entire tour, which everything was required to buy the batteries, rent the travel van to get them from Vancouver across Western Canada and back, look after their basically what their expenses they fundraised through Kickstarter. So that was very successful. So they're decentralized in kind of in three ways. They kind of look after the organization of the events and the scheduling of the events is a decentralized way, meaning that basically it boils down to who's going to accept to get involved. They don't say this is where it's going to be. They put out the invitations, people decide. The central aesthetic element of the performance is decentralized insofar as it can be at this point with the technology that's available. It's interesting to note that as a contemporary thing, it doesn't really use contemporary technology. It uses contemporary communications technology via Facebook, but it uses just regular old kind of actually detritus of the urban scene, an FM transmitter that the Canadian government doesn't even transmit anything anymore. People basically have to have digital signals now to get any connection to anything. So going back to use analog in this situation is really going the other way. And using your boomboxes strategically. I mean, economically, I don't even think you can buy a boombox anymore. There's just thousands of them sitting around. You can get them for dollars at pawn shops and at flea markets and yard sales, and people are just getting rid of them, because they're designed to listen to CDs and cassette players. So they have the central feature of being able to tune into a frequency, and if you have an FM transmitter, you have, for relatively low cost, a sound system that's decentralized. The decentralized element of it is incredibly important. Decentralization has a number of strategic values, but I don't want to get sidetracked by the strategic element. I want to bring up front at the very, very beginning that this is a very clearly conceived educational program that Tom and Gary got involved with at the beginning. It's a reclamation program where they're reclaiming public space. And in the process of reclaiming public space, creating the opportunity for people in an urban environment to have an experience of commonality, to experience their relationship with the commons, perhaps for the first time in an urban center. It comes out of a response to, as Gary explained, he grew up in a rural situation where he could get together with his friends and have tailgate parties in the middle of the woods and nobody would bug them. They could party in rock quarries or whatever and have a good time. Young people had a place to gather. In the urban centers, in Vancouver or many other urban places, kids are considered problems. They're considered, as Henry Giroux recently wrote, they're disposable. Children are not only disposable but dangerous. Youth are constantly broken up. The idea of allowing people to collect anywhere in an urban space is frowned upon. That creates a situation where you have a bunch of young people not able to have a relationship with their urban spaces, and because of that, not able to have a relationship with one another. The Decentralized Dance Party uses urban spaces to force the authorities in a particular town to develop a relationship with the common experience that emerges from the Decentralized Dance Party, okay? It's able to be possible, and this is the strategic element. This is able to be possible because it's not an event. Tom and Gary did not need a permit for this. You don't need a permit because it's a gathering. There's no alcohol being sold. There's no centralized sound system. There's no ticketing structure. There's no money being distributed at the event. This is a public gathering. Technology allows for this public gathering to happen, and fortunately, public gatherings are still legal. The fact that when thousands of people gather in an urban space, the fact that it shuts down the city becomes a real consequence. So they make sure to let the police know and the city authorities know that this is coming. They don't ask for a permit, nor do I think they would necessarily sign one, because they can't control what happens at a democratic gathering. But it's an event nonetheless, which has the impact of shutting down huge parts of town. You can imagine thousands of people walking around with boomboxes has quite an effect. Decentralization, therefore, doesn't mean kind of an ambiguity of a relationship. In this sense, decentralization provides the framework for a kind of deeply felt and richly textured social flow that happens within the urban space. So, moving from the kind of description of what the Decentralized Dance Party is to kind of exploring the methodological apparatuses that we have, I kind of draw on Deleuze and Guattari a little bit, quite a bit, for some language. I like the idea of flows. The Decentralized Dance Party is very much about a whole bunch of flows. And at the end of this presentation, I'll send you or give you the link to an audio documentary, a 20-minute audio documentary I made from the Calgary instance. It's on SoundCloud, so I'll give you the link to that so you can listen to the experience of the flows. Musical flows throughout the entire thing. Tom and Gary, as curators, set up a playlist in advance, usually using mostly old style songs. It's mostly party favorites. This is like it's best of the last 10 or 20 years. Everything from like big Don Henley hits to to deep grooves of dance parties mixed across. You have moments where everybody's dancing to party mixes, and then you can hear everybody singing a familiar refrain together, and all of a sudden thousands of people find a unified voice. The social flows are obvious. This is a photo of the police are here and traffic here and here. The social flow shuts down the city. The social flow that kind of emerges from the Decentralized Dance Party has an enormous effect on mapping the urban space and the kind of improvisational element of how these flows happen in the city maps out and kind of transforms the urban space in very important ways. One of the most significant for me, I'm going to show you this photo again. This is a skate park in downtown Calgary. This is the largest skate park in North America, apparently, the Millennium Shaw Skate Park. We're going to come back to this because this is where we ended up. But we left from there, and the party took over a parking garage and transformed a parking garage into a dance club for about an hour or so. The kind of the flow of people moving within and kind of moved by their relationship to the music that they're listening to would kind of take over and transform in relationship to the physical spaces, in relationship to the urban spaces, changing the relationship that people had to one another and to the music based on their relationship with the urban space. And the historical flows, this is something that I feel more than I can intellectually pull to the forefront. There's a whole bunch of historical flows happening here. The relationship that people have to the public spaces that are being taken over, like the parks. I'll give you a very specific situation. The third stop on the tour was a park in downtown Calgary, and it has water features. It has sprinklers and little waterfalls and a little stream that kind of moves through rocks and through trees and stuff. So everybody takes over this park, and Tom and Gary played YMCA. Hundreds of people start jumping in the water, and they look like they're 6. YMCA simultaneously becomes the disco dance hit where everybody's doing the YMCA thing, but it also becomes the YMCA that they took swimming lessons in when they were a kid, and it becomes the relationship that people had with the downtown river or whatever in the summertime, and it becomes the park that they're so familiar with, but always policed against actually getting in the water and always wanted to play in the water together. All of this is happening simultaneously, drawing on a number of historical threads that I think really need to be explored, but that's going to take a little bit of time to do. The flow has an immediate relationship to what I'm going to borrow again from Deleuze's guitar, what they call the refrain. This is towards the end of the evening. These shots are taken with 15 or 20 seconds probably in between them. This is that skate park that I showed you the photo of. I'll get it away. So you can see how over that very short period of time, all of these flows of people kind of moved in. What I found most interesting is that it didn't create a whole bunch of different pockets of people just doing their own stuff. There was not even any tension about people creating their own little pockets. Everybody kind of flowed in together into the center of this skate park, and I mean they had to go out of their way to get to the center. I mean, there's the ramps and jumps and gullies, and like these are deep, deep places, like 15, 16 feet concrete structures that they had to go in and down and across and up just to get to the center. The refrain that's created when, to use the musical idea, the idea of the refrain or something that we repeat, provides simultaneously the construction of a territory and through the construction of the territory kind of an expression of pulse that's in the center of both the music and the social form. So separating our musical discussion from the social discussion becomes perhaps unnecessary. Always lurking, however, always lurking. These two guys, that's the Calgary police, and there's a lot of them. And they're all just kind of there with their cowboy hats, just looking, making sure that everybody's happy and safe. From 1,000 Plateaus, can this emergence be called art? Is the extallation itself, this thing that happens, is this an art expression? Is this, from an ethnomusicological point of view, I mean, is this social thing an art piece? Is this extallation an aesthetic conversation? This is a hula hooper with a glow-in-the-dark hula hoop caught on camera. Is this both him expressing himself and turning himself into an art piece to be photographed? Is that play of art production as central to the pulse and refrain and the creation of territory and the exploration of the kind of urban landscape through this extallation piece? Is this an aesthetic territory in itself that can be both a social event and an aesthetic discussion? This gets us into fraught territory, the kind of the postmodernist and the timeliness. This is a whole kind of postmodern discussion that I know could break out at any moment. I want to bracket and say, yeah, absolutely, and put it over there and look at some other possibilities. I like Jacques Rancière's, French philosopher's discussion of the aesthetic regime. Basically, he says the history of art practice can be looked at broadly as 3 different regimes. Now, art practice, he says, always basically has the same kind of components. The difference between each of the regimes is that some components come to the forefront more than others. Now, let's look at those. Let's look at the things that come to the forefront, and then try to understand the relationship that the artist has to society, and society to the understanding of art. The aesthetic regime, he talks about it starting at about the early 1900s. I'm not certain if he lines up with the kind of introduction and kind of development of the audio recording. I'm not certain if that's his timeline, but it certainly seems to be around the same time as Benjamin published, the Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction. That awareness of something changing, Rancière identifies as the aesthetic regime. And within the aesthetic regime, the production of art takes on a socially significant role. It's something that's different than the art regime before it, which he called representation. Our relationship with the art piece, me having that kind of conscious kind of reflection, that relationship of thoughtful speculation and distance, that identifies and clearly limits my proximity to an art piece. The relationship of the subjective spectator with the objective thing. That relationship, right? Rancière begins to kind of turn on its head. Maybe in the aesthetic regime, maybe the art thing is actually something that's more kind of socially produced. Recently, a book out, Nicolas Bourriaud, another French aesthetic guy, put out something that's called Relational Aesthetics. And he argues that since the 90s, aesthetics have to be understood in terms of its relationships. Art practice is not about making art pieces. It's about creating the context for sociality, the context for being social. Within this, Felix Guattari would call transversality the process by which we move as subjective beings. This process of moving happens, I think, at three different levels, connecting to the flows that we were talking about before. My experience and the ethnographic research that I've done to date will suggest that the urban flow, that flow that we looked at the beginning of actual physical, biological people moving around, physical and built architecture, happens not just at that level, but it also happens at the level of subjective exploration. What was going on during the YMCA piece was not just people jumping in the water. There was not the flows, and this gets back to the historical flows. The flows are also the flows of negotiating identity, the flows of negotiating communality, the flows of kind of understanding who you are in relation to your life as a living being at this moment in time in this urban center, exploring a newfound kind of subjective freedom in an urban space that was once familiar and now is profoundly changed. And the relationship that you're having with the people that you're having it with is having a kind of a deeply moving, perhaps a deeply moving kind of impact, perhaps. So it happens at a musical level, exploring the kind of historic flows in relationship to the music. It happens at the social level. You're kind of traversing all of these kind of social terrains, and it happens at the subjective level. All of these Guattarian three ecologies boils down to three interconnected ecological models: the subjective ecology, the social ecology, and the environmental ecology. The subjective ecology can basically be boiled down but not simplified to just mental, a mental conversation, right? As a kind of post-Freudian, post-Lacanian psychoanalyst, he's interested in that terrain. But he recognizes that terrain is linked to the social terrain. So if you're interested in creating a more free or more democratic society, then it has to begin first with the transformation of the subjective terrain. You have to liberate yourself subjectively before you can liberate yourself socially. That relationship they recognize as being central to post 1970 politics. And now, what's the environmental relationship to it? Now I'm asking this from two different points of view. Given where we are, particularly I'm in Alberta, given where we are in relationship to our ecological impact on the earth, the way our actual ecological impact on our built environments, the relationship that we have to what we might call the inner city, the relationship we have to our suburbs and our streets and to our community. This environmental relationship, the relationship we have to the urban built environment that the Decentralized Dance Party is taking over, okay? has the ability to transform both the social and the subjective ecologies. Consequently, the transformation of those also has the ability to impact, I shouldn't say transform, has the opportunity to impact each of them. Each of these three ecologies are interlinked, so they're locked. Moving from that, it creates the possibility, Negri argues and Guattari argues, and now Negri and Hart argue, it has the opportunity to create the multitude, an expression of togetherness that's different from the togetherness that we've experienced previously. A togetherness that kind of, I don't want to say frustrates, but goes beyond, expands on the ways that we've learned to have a relationship with one another. Either that's expanding on the ideas of class, ethnicity, social, any of the kind of inherited social structures that we have, because they're constantly being frustrated by urban space. Urban experience is about pushing together all sorts of things that we sociologically and anthropologically have been trying to separate in order to understand. Urbanness often frustrates all of these. And in the process of frustrating it, creates the opportunity, perhaps, to instigate a new kind of conversation. And the new kind of conversation that the Decentralized Dance Party is having is one that asks people to take responsibility for their relationship to each other in a collective way, and makes them responsible to their relationship to the city in which they live. The Decentralized Dance Party, because they take over the city, puts all of the people involved in a situation to actually reflect on what it means to take the responsibility of your social life into your own hands and do something about it on your own terms in the city that you're living in. Instead of coming off the bus and going downtown and paying $5 to relinquish your responsibility, drink your face off, and go out and fight in the street, all of a sudden the Decentralized Dance Party is saying, no, you can't drink in public spaces because we've decided collectively you can't. The cops are here. We've agreed with them that we can't be walking around hiding alcohol because we've chosen that it's against the law. If we want to choose otherwise, then we're going to have to do something about it. We have to respect the rules that we've all agreed to live with. But we're also, in exchange, we're going to take back the streets, and we're going to take back the opportunity for having social life outside of police control, essentially, and outside of the control of capitalist organizations built along main streets, whose sole desire is to get you as drunk as possible and take as much money from you as possible, and then send you out in the street with it, and to go home. To not engage in any sort of democratic or any sort of politically oriented, and when I say political, I mean socially building oriented mode of social relationship. One that promotes the idea of heterogeneity, promotes difference but togetherness simultaneously. The idea of a self-generating social life that we used to call the public, that has been undermined by a whole bunch of, undermined essentially by the process of privatization in part. This relates directly to the kind of anarchist underpinnings of the Decentralized Dance Party. Their party manifesto that they put out a while back, playfully punning the political party manifesto, by bringing to the forefront the political implications of learning to party. And it's basically as simple and as complex as liberating your physical body from the social constraints under which they live. Our actual physical bodies to dance in public, under the lights of the street, in a socially engaged situation, in public, creating the public. It sounds easy, but all of a sudden you have thousands of young people who have been taught to control their bodies in public spaces, who've been taught not to express themselves in any sort of ways that lead to any sort of physical liberation. Suddenly, in a very small way, there's a very small little revolution happening, a micro-political revolution's happening, where these young people are actually finding, I believe, they're finding a relationship to their physical body in public spaces that they've yet to explore. The political ramifications of this are unknown, obviously. But I'm interested in asking a couple of questions, and they're provoked by the Listen Bird, in part. This is a graffiti artist in Edmonton who graffitis this little bird and listen all over the city. The built environment provoking you to listen to the relationship that you're having with the urban space. So listen to the possibility of sound making, of uttering, and ultimately, I think the political relationship, because it's graffiti, the political relationship and perhaps the liberatory possibilities, the micro-political possibilities that this sort of, create openness, this kind of the manifestation, I suppose, of community building in public spaces, taking over and taking responsibility for ourselves as socially engaged and hopefully democratically engaged folks, building something in a decentralized way that is ultimately making our lives more artful and learning how to kind of improvise with the urban built environment in a way that makes our lives richer and more engaged, I think. That's where I am, and I'm super interested in your questions. Yeah.
Thanks so much for that. One thing I was wondering with the decentralized dance party and kind of the nature of it is, obviously you've talked to these two, what are their names?
Tom and Gary.
Tom and Gary.
Yeah.
Have they thought at all about, right now they're the curators.
Yeah.
Are they thinking about changing that relationship?
Yes.
Where they have other folks curating?
Yeah, they're in the process of having a new type of boombox invented, where it can send and receive.
Okay.
So they're trying to come up with the technology to send and receive, so people can switch on and identify who they send and receive, who they receive. Yeah, they can choose to receive different frequencies.
Right. Sorry, they can choose to receive. So folks will be having different experiences?
Yes.
Or, okay, what I was kind of wondering is whether they've thought about having one experience with multiple inputs. So I could play a song, you could play a song, but we'd all be experiencing
Right.
the same.
That's kind of what they're talking about.
Okay.
In that basically they would provide the opportunity for everybody to send and receive as they chose,
Okay,
and then see what happens.
yeah,
So that way, thousands of people could all be sending,
yeah,
or thousands of people could all be receiving.
right,
We just don't know.
right. And it's interesting that I'm assuming they're bound to that idea of the boombox as a portable piece and as old school technology, as you were kind of pointing out, because that does
Yeah, it limits.
potentially limit it.
Sure does. In keeping with, I'm an ethnomusicologist, so I don't read in the visual arts that much. But now that I'm reading more and more in the visual arts, I'm finding many more instances of using old technology and the aesthetic, kind of the aesthetic significance of using old technology to create visual art pieces. The boombox is such an important technology as a social thing,
Exactly.
and it's so connected to urbanism.
The ghetto blast.
Yeah, right. That the physicality of the boombox is,
Yeah.
super important. So, even though there will be technologies that will probably be better,
Yeah.
the social history of the boombox is hard to be,
That's awesome.
and to feel it. And when you see the pictures of people raising the boombox over their head or slinging it on their shoulders, they change. They become that 1980s photograph that they saw. You know, that their stance changes, their attitude changes. That, you know, the kids hold the boombox over their head and suddenly they're somewhere and somebody else. That's, I think, can't be underestimated.
Sorry, I'll let other people talk.
I just kind of have a question following up on the boombox, actually. I'm wondering if there's a comment in there, even if, I mean, you see what they do with the boombox, if there's a comment in there around manufactured obsolescence and consumption, anti-consumptive. I know I'm sure the iPod they're using is in the generation, you know, 1 or 2,
Yeah.
which is last month, but
Yeah.
is there do you think there might be a comment in there
Oh,
around,
yes, very much.
you know,
Yeah.
public space and being young and consumption?
Yeah, it's, and it's, although it's easy to say, and I'll say it, yes, because the threads of history, like slinging the boombox over your shoulder, the threads of history that are engaged with, even in confronting planned obsolescence, has become an act of renegade history. Like, I mean, fighting against, I mean, you know, ad busters, right? The whole history of ad busters is fought on these grounds, and this is a fight that's been going on a long time. So engaging with that, in which they do, and they're very clear about doing that, but they're using the boombox because it really is an early example of this. So it has an environmental aspect, right? But it also is connected to, it's deeper than that, because Gary has used not the same boombox, but the same model boombox for years. So he's gone through probably 8 or 9 of the same one. So he keeps looking for the same one. It's like Rosebud, you know, that it's like that sled. And it's the same one it's the one that he wanted his father to buy him when he was younger, that he eventually got. And it was the one that it didn't have a CD player, it had a cassette player, and he didn't have a way to play CDs on it, so he plugged it into a CD player, which is what started, what planted the seed for him to realize many years later that he'd plug his iPod into it when they were biking around Vancouver, and he could just tie the boombox onto the back of his bike. And they used to do that, and then they used to do it with a radio station, and they used to all tune into the same radio station and bicycle around the city. And then they went one day, wait a minute, we could plug this into a transmitter. And then they spent time saving up money to get a transmitter. So there's a lot of stuff going on there, and I think is at the root of your question. And the political part of it, I think this is what I'm trying to say. We have also built in planned obsolescence into our lives. We have perhaps, I have released or gotten rid of or turned into the pawn shop certain parts of my life, right? Certain periods of time that I've been told that I'm going to use for this time, and then I'm going to let go to do something else. The boombox is tied into that. It's like Tom and Gary are refusing to relinquish that part of their lives. They're refusing to put away being a child. They're refusing to, they're basically refusing to. They're going to the pawn shop, you know, the pawn shop of history, and reclaiming not only the boombox, but all of the stuff that's tied into their youth, and keeping that alive. Thanks for the question. I haven't thought of that before.
I felt like there was something around nostalgia
Yeah.
in a lot of this that is an undercurrent.
Yeah, but in that it's not the nostalgia shop though, but it's the pawn shop. It's like, what's the difference between the nostalgia shop and the pawn shop? Because they're not the same, I don't think. There's something, you know, nostalgia is not DIY. I don't know. That's a really good question.
I want to ask you about the office chic,
Yeah.
because, I mean, there's a lot of things I want to ask you about, but I'll stick with the office chic. Could you maybe pull up the picture? Because frankly, his fly isn't all done all the way
No, it's
up.
not.
And which I noticed because I just thought that is such from a feminist point of view, I just thought that is almost borderline offensive, that would be a part of the workplace and she wouldn't have to be, do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's borderline sexual, like I just, and the three-piece suit, and yet it seems like it's tying in with the popularity of The Office, and not only just
Yeah.
the American one, but then Ricky Gervais and the British one,
Yeah.
and then the three-piece suit, which makes me think of Mad Men and
Yeah.
the 60s, and then that depiction of office life, which is of course inherently misogynistic, and that's what popularity is based on. So why The Office, and why this version of The Office, and just go with it. What happens when I do that to you?
Okay. Go. Well, this is really interesting because we actually talked about his fly when we were taking this photo. Because he said, by the way, my fly's broken. And I said, I know that because I can see that. So do you want to put on different pants? He said, no, it's just broken.
Okay.
And it was like, wow. Okay. So these are the two responses that I came up with. He doesn't care,
Okay.
and it's also corduroy.
Well, and the shirt is off-white to be generous.
Yeah.
So there's
Yeah.
something really dirty about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the whole kind of the glasses and the haircut and the supervisor.
Well, and that's making me
the
think of Andy
domination and
Samberg
stuff.
and,
Yeah.
And what the island, does anyone know?
Lonely Island.
The Lonely Island group and Dick and Box and
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And
Well, and I think he'd be totally fine with that.
Would be cool.
With that
there
interrogation.
you go. And the picture hanging on the wall.
It's brilliant, eh? And the end that his fly is broken because it's old clothes.
Right.
So there's two things going on in two different directions simultaneously. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
I think your interrogation is exactly right on the money, and there's so much swirling around masculinity
Yeah.
and the male body dancing in public, and they don't shirk from that really at all. They play up the masculinity and with a great deal of irony, and the irony is able to come through because of the breakdown of it. There's something, I feel that there's something Fight Club about his outfit, right? It's both irony and failed irony and macho, trying to get through masculinity and
There's a whole lot going on.
a whole bunch of stuff that he knows, not intellectually.
And yet the haircut isn't old school.
No.
That's what fascinates me, is that there's so much that he could have gone way farther that he didn't.
Yeah.
Which intrigues me on water.
It's a web, it's like they're in him and Gary, I've never met Tom, and they remain very much enigmatic. You'll not see a photograph of him without the glasses on, like he won't do things without the glasses. I've never seen him outside this costume. And I've talked to him about, this is in the middle of the day, sometime in the middle of the summer, and I showed up in the morning and he had the costume on already. Like he's very much living that costume thing.
There's just so much contempt for office life and culture and everything that we see around us, including in this. It just makes me wonder what's coming next. Or are we just celebrating a culture of we do stuff that we hate for a living? There's so much going on. I wonder about that sometimes.
Yeah, totally. No, I'm with you. And it just ties into, again, it ties into that art piece. So there. The idea that they lived the experience and they created an experience to be an art piece, but it's also they live everything about what they do. They live as an art piece. Like everything connected to this is built on aesthetic stuff that they're always playing with and subverting. Like this is not Gary. Like I don't know who Gary is necessarily, if that's important at all. And he kind of makes it clear that it's not. It's dragging me into a whole bunch of interesting stuff.
Well,
Well, because I was thinking of the references to the television shows, but I'm thinking that do they refer to any movies that they're actually trying to recreate as an art piece, maybe taking it out on the street and tweaking it? I'm getting some vibes from some movies, and I can't put my finger on it.
Yeah, Footloose.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and I would
yeah.
think he'd be happy to accept all of those. It's the Decentralized Dance Party, DDP, besides also being a German, political organization, is a pop culture machine. Like, it's a machine for taking signs that are floating in our society and processing the signs in very complex ways. It's an Extallation that also is kind of a pop culture sausage factory. And I mean that in both ways, I think. That it kind of produces complexly interconnected, nonsensible sign pairings that are intentionally confounding. And in that process of being confounding, they also provoke. And what they're doing in creating the entire thing is really trying to provide people with what they consider to be a political education.
Well, I'll just make this comment, because I thought, while you were going through your presentation, I just thought, I mean, this is so superficial. It's a dance party, right? And
Yeah.
then, and your analysis of, negotiating identity and, political statements, and I thought, these people they just want to, have a party, and they're using Facebook to do it. And, so it's really interesting, the tension between the superficial and whatever, manipulations of social media and symbols are going on as well. Maybe not intentional, but they're definitely there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But I would consider all politics superficial. I mean, compared to what our political leaders have been saying, Jack Layton has been turned into a t-shirt in the last couple of months. I mean, sloganeering is not something that they've invented. I mean, politics is about sloganeering. But this is kind of a superficiality that also creates public relationships in public spaces. And that's what I think I'm really interested in. There's a great deal of discourse in ethnomusicology that kind of pokes holes at this kind of, sure, that's political. It's, what does this change? It's not going to change the world, but it's going to provide the opportunity to build relationships. And what we know from economics is building relationships creates social capital, and social capital creates the foundation upon which economic development can happen. If that happens, then this kind of superficial politics plays a role in a much larger puzzle, granted, it needs many, many more pieces. And I don't want to inflate this to say this is going to change the world, but there's very little difference between this and a political movement, except more people will attend this.
But I think it might change the world, right? In that, so the images that I've seen of large masses of people in Canadian cities of late have been this, after the NHL final, and the G20.
Yeah, exactly.
So those are changing the world.
Yeah.
In terms of media use and how people view, and their response to major events.
Yeah.
And this is directly encounter to that.
Thank you for bringing that up. Actually, this plays into something that's going to be the next phase of the research, or the next phase of the project. The Decentralized Dance Party had an event, the second last game of Boston and Vancouver, the finals anyway. The second last game, when they also lost in Vancouver, or the second last game they lost in Vancouver, the Decentralized Dance Party was also happening. They didn't realize there was a hockey game happening. They lost, and thousands of drunk people came out of the forum and were swallowed up by the party. Gary is currently writing a paper for the city government that says, listen, we've got plenty of visual evidence to suggest that the only difference between this loss and this loss, besides it being the final game, was this loss, following this, those people were swallowed up by a social thing. And this loss just threw thousands of drunk people into urban spaces with nothing to do, and with a whole bunch of social energy that couldn't be channeled and couldn't be used. And the research, my doctoral research, was on festivals. And one of the things that I found in the festivals is that festivals create what I call social architecture. Things that are like built environments, but are invisible because they're social, right? But they're social built environments that allow people to invest and divest social energies. Those social machines can take previously existing energy and help people utilize it in different ways. If people aren't given the opportunity to kind of channel their creative energies into something, well, sorry, I'll put it this way, people will invest their energies into the easiest thing. The easiest thing is always blowing something up. It's always easier to destroy something because it's just obvious, you're running into a wall. So the Decentralized Dance Party is looking at providing the city government with an opportunity to not police social life, but to help invest social energy in a more responsible way, so that it doesn't get into a situation where those thousands of people can come out and get swallowed up by a party that helps them run off their social energy by dancing and running around the city, instead of by lighting cars on fire. And I think that has the potential of being pretty, significant.
That's fantastic. Unfortunately, my cynical brain goes, oh, Sony's providing the boomboxes for that Vancouver event, and
Yeah.
it becomes this corporation owned Blanche
Yep.
thing. I don't know that that's necessarily horrible. I mean, it still would serve the same purpose, but I was disappointed that my brain went there so fast, having heard.
Yeah,
Such a-
well,
such
I
a
think
great
that's,
idea,
I think that's absolutely responsible. And I think you're right. There is always going to be the risk that this is going to get swallowed up by a corporation.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, if I was a corporation, I would be right now plotting for a way to swallow this up.
Totally.
Because it's a bloody good idea, and it'll make somebody a ton of money. And that's where the real politics is going to happen.
Well, and even the fact that it's being, advertised and organized on Facebook,
Yeah.
I'm sure Facebook's happy about that.
Oh yeah, and they're already, Red Bull is already involved.
Yeah.
And, they showed up in their Red Bull mobiles, and, it's gonna happen, right? It's just.
And then at what point do record companies give X amount of dollars for these specific songs to be played?
Yeah.
And at what point do little 10-second commercial snippets come in between those songs?
And then they plant people in specific places with
To-
proper t-shirts on.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely right. And it's gonna happen.
Yeah.
I don't think, I think it would be naive to believe that it's not going to. However, seeing a possible end doesn't necessarily mean that it's not gonna also provide the opportunity for a kind of a renewed political education for young people.
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up on Adbusters and Rage Against the Machine. I got my political education, stickering stop signs and, protesting Starbucks. I mean, I think that's a great, I don't do that now, but I invest those energies and I invest that kind of political education in other ways. So perhaps for the time being, right now, this is the type of political education that we need to provide. So maybe that'll turn into something else for.
I mean, I can also imagine that state, and then a way of protesting that state with with different boomboxes on a different transmitter, et cetera, et cetera.
Totally.
But
Or something completely different.
yeah, who knows? But also I wonder if we're in a place now, if if there's a space now where that's kind of a projection, is there anything to be done to like safeguard against the worst thing we can imagine happening? You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Like, is there something that can be done, like, and we kind of check off a few things so that it doesn't go down the worst possible path?
Yeah, and that was the idea, that was the idea behind Kickstarter. To make, to come up with an engine to provide money that is consonant with the interests of the organization.
Yeah.
So that hopefully is going to, if the Kickstarter thing works out, because it's a money thing, if they're making enough money from Kickstarter, and if taking money from Sony and putting in advertisements is going to impact their Kickstarter funding, then it's just, by economic sense, they're going to continue to crowdfund. I think that's really that's at least what is hopeful. I mean, these guys they're not anti-corporate, but they're very much pro other models of making money, and they really want to experiment with the possibility of being a self-run, self-made artist where they make their money from crowdfunding, from people that want to see their art, instead of just, I mean, we grew up in tobacco funding and alcohol funding for everything, you know?
I'm not pretending it's
Yeah.
easy to.
So right now, they're ideologically motivated, and we'll see if the economics works out, then if crowdfunding works out, then who knows where it'll go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, one of the, seems to me that one of the things that makes events like this so attractive to marketers is that the event is already premised on consumption in a lot of ways. And like, you look a certain way, and you buy a certain kind of glasses, and you buy a certain boombox, and you drink a certain thing when you're out. I mean, how do they negotiate that tension? Like, is there a way out of that, or like, do they perceive a way out of that kind of tension?
No, and if anything, from what I understand with the Decentralized Dance Party, they're looking to court as many tensions as possible and make them obvious. We tried to shut them down. So they try to create an injunction and try to call the police to stop them, and then we have to get lawyers instead of trying to shy away from stuff. Standoff there a couple of days. 20,000 people had signed up on Facebook. There was no, and Facebook puts an email limit after a certain number of people signing up to an event. So beyond 20,000, they couldn't call it off. Like, there was no safety switch. So they were like, well, it's going to happen. You can try to stop us. We hope you won't. But we're not gonna buy something from you. This is going to happen, and here we are in a standoff. So what do you want to do? And eventually, well, it happened, and the police got on side. Police have been great, by the way, all across the country.
And presumably there's been no incidents?
None. The only incident was the police from Regina started calling ahead all of the other police forces and saying it's not going to be a problem. So, as far as they know so far, that's their only relationship with the cops. The cities, on the other hand, not so supportive.
Because I immediately jumped to what if shit happens, and then what happens to Gary, and does he have a suit? Like, can people take action against
No.
for creating a space?
Well, they could try.
Yeah.
But because it's like, as a legal body, they fall under the kind of the umbrella of kind of a social swarm. You know, it's like you email that you're going to have a Thriller dance-a-thon at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Everybody shows up and they do that.
Yeah.
Same kind of thing. It's just a spontaneous social event. That a curator does a whole bunch of planning for it. Maybe gray area, but I think it would be something that if somebody did bring them to court, I think it would would go to the Supreme Court to defend the Commons against the privatization of local government, privatization of local space by local governments.
There's something that you mentioned in answering another question that really, really caught my ear, and that was the idea of making a space for males to dance in public.
Yeah.
Because generally, not only does that not happen, but males police themselves not to act like a fool anywhere where everybody else around them is a drunk.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
just the idea to me of creating that space is in some ways it's almost a feminist act in that it creates the possibility for people to just be themselves and not have to have that that tension of, oh, who's on the make, or what's going to happen here, or who, you know, it's just people dancing. And if that's what everybody believes, then that's what it is. But I can remember 3 years ago, the jazz festival here has a tent set up in the street that runs until 11 something. And just before midnight, I left there heading to a bar that has funk music. And just before midnight, the same weekend that most of the students get back into town, there was a lineup around the corner. And so a few of us just started dancing. The window was wide open. You could hear the music. And it really struck me as crazy that there were people who tried to say that was against the law. They actually tried to stop us, tried to physically intervene, tried to, and I'm talking young people, tried to just walk up and lecture us that that was not right, that, you know, that I was stealing by dancing without having gone in.
Yeah.
And the cops had no problem. The cops have problems with the people who get themselves stupid drunk and then make bloody fools of themselves.
Yes.
People just kicking their heels up is the last thing that's a problem for the cops.
Yeah. And I think that's what the police are responding to so far, is that they're seeing that, wow, we can actually have thousands of people gathered in the city, and we don't need a riot squad. We don't need to even think to have the riot squad on the street. We can just be around. And I'm the son of a police officer, right? I know the way cops think. They're they learn to become incredibly paranoid because what they see is bad stuff all the time.
Yeah.
And people become the enemy. Because the only time they get to relate to large groups is when they need to enforce, basically they need to enforce social order, right? So often, the relationship between the police and the public is one of, oppression, one of where riot squads need to really control people in large numbers. So yeah, the police thing is interesting, but also the privatization thing. I just want to underline what you said about the privatization thing. The kind of ontological impact that private business has had on our imaginations, to think that something that we hear could possibly be private, could possibly be owned by somebody, and that you need to have undergone an economic process in order to have access to it, is frankly frightening. And I've heard many, many instances of this, and one I want to share with you. I was behind somebody at a festival, and the guy said to his friend, I love coming to music festivals because it's only here once a year that I remember that what I hear on the radio is actually made by human beings. Like, for people that work at university or around music and the arts all the time, we kind of take it for granted that humans are, I don't think we would even begin to imagine that the general public doesn't necessarily have a kind of human connection with the arts. It's kind of profoundly disturbing. The more ethnographic work I do, the more I discover that more and more people are beginning to become so distant from what it is that makes us kind of human, like our relationship to expressive culture, that their only access to it is through economics, and that they don't have any access to it to themselves. You know, and I think that's at the root of that experience that you had. Yeah.
Interestingly, just going way back in my memory, I used to think when I was young that the music that was played on the radio was by people that were coming in and playing music, and then the next band would come in.
Oh, interesting.
You know?
Awesome.
And then they would leave.
Awesome.
You know, it made sense, right?
That's
Because it's,
fascinating. Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we have to learn, we have to learn that it's made otherwise, I guess.
What kind of feedback do you get from the dancers? Like, what is their, I mean, are they invested in the political side of it too, or?
I haven't interviewed enough people yet to know. I don't know, I just don't know. My guess is that, I would guess that the vast majority, like more than 95% wouldn't even be political. This is, go back to what you're saying, this is just a party.
Well, and yeah, wouldn't it be slightly surreal to be dancing, say, in this, like, I'm trying to imagine going to someplace in Ottawa that I know is a public park, that I know, or I'm trying to think of something like this happening in Paris, right, where you can't go on the grass or anything, and it would just be surreal, wouldn't it, to suddenly be dressed up with a boombox and all this, like, I just think that would, you'd have to notice that that something out of the ordinary was going on.
Oh yeah, it has an enormous impact.
Right.
On the people involved. I heard countless people going, this is like a dream. This is like another place. This is like something else. This is like, and
surreal.
yeah, it's those connections that I think open the door to things. That's why I think I want to consider this an extallation and an art piece as opposed to something that's necessarily political. And then follow people like Rancière who illustrate the politics of the aesthetic instead of saying that this is kind of political in the old way that we're thinking about being political. Biopolitical politics is really happens in how we organize our lives, right? The real politics of our lives is how we exist socially in our urban spaces. Doesn't matter, well, how you vote has an impact on it, but increasingly less so in many cases. And how you kind of live in your urban space is really where the real politics is happening. If we begin to take over public spaces regularly, responsibly, you could have a full-scale social transformation without anybody even recognizing it being political at all.
Yeah, maybe what I keep thinking is this has to transform people's thinking because it's getting them to do something you wouldn't ordinarily do.
Totally.
And perhaps it's the idealist in me. I'm often faulted for this, but that's got to have some sort of domino effect, wouldn't it? It's like driving on the wrong side of the road or something, and you suddenly realize it's entirely arbitrary that you do it the other way, except, try not to kill yourself, I guess. But just challenging the arbitrariness of our choices.
Yep.
It must have some impact. I don't know.
I would suggest it does. And that's at the root of the culture jamming, right? The idea that by getting engaged and engaging with the built environment and advertising in a confrontational way opens doors for other things. And what I think so profound about Guattari's work with the 3 ecologies, when I started thinking about my mental health as being environmental health, and realizing that there are ideas that pollute me just as profoundly as chemicals that pollute me. I began thinking about my relationship with the common world differently. And if people have that kind of opening, and then yeah, who knows where it can go. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I think this is good for a lot of different reasons, and mostly it's because of the unrestricting bodies, or giving bodies a place to be unrestricted, because I have gone to numerous music performances where nobody will partake in dancing, and I take issue with the fact that only men's bodies are restricted. Women's bodies are very restricted, and maybe even more so. I was just moved here from Montreal, and in the 4 years I was there, I noticed an extremely large shift from women being the larger dancers at like a musical performance, obviously where you pay, it's not like a free event, to men overtaking the space, and essentially frightening and keeping women out of the space, which is why I was glad to leave, you know, Montreal. Another really interesting place about Montreal is I don't know this, not me, but they do have public space access, and I lived in Ottawa before as well. I've been kicked out of parks before for just sitting around and not being supposed to be there, supposed to be touristy and everything. But in Montreal, on Sundays, the city space is reclaimed. The mountain area, if you've ever been there, there's huge dance party. People come out, they bring their drums, they bring all their like instruments they can bring with them, guitars. People dance right by this giant statue of an angel at the bottom of Mount Royal, right in the middle of downtown Montreal. And people sit around, people dance, people sell, they have street vendors who sell things on the street. There's also an event called Picnic at Picnic, which is more like this, and I've never gone, so I don't know if it costs. But again, it's like a huge techno dance party with no large speakers.
Yeah.
And it's on another grassy part of the island where people just go and hang out. And it does create a huge sense of community and a much less restricted sense. So yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there.
Absolutely, and I just want to tie that to something, because Tam Tam is, a very profound thing, because I ran a music store in Ottawa, and I imported drums. And while I was there, I was trying to create a fair trade drum import thing, and it was Tam Tam that allowed me to even begin to have that conversation, because so many people were buying drums. More people were buying drums, like hand drums, from our stores than anywhere. So it has really profound implications on that side. But I want to also point out that, are you familiar with the Rainbow Gathering? Okay, so this is another part of my research project. The Rainbow Gathering is, so in around 1970, people began to do exactly this sort of thing in the US, taking over public land in the summertime. So going to a national park, taking over a national park. So that started in 1970. This year there was more than 20,000 people, and they go and live in this national park. I was there for almost 3 weeks, but people are there, living there for a month or and sometimes more. The only place in Canada that happens is in Quebec. I would guess, and I don't know for sure, but I would guess that Tam Tam has a relationship with the Rainbow Gathering in Quebec, because it's exactly the same thing that happens in different parts of Quebec, and they're related internationally with this Rainbow family, which is a reclamation project and a kind of reclaiming and reproducing the commons in the summertime in rural spaces. And this is part of and the Decentralized Dance Party, although they don't really, I don't think they would identify themselves as being part of this process, but there is a social process going on that's interconnected and has people flowing through it all over the world. So it's I don't know what you're doing for your research, but the profound changes of social life and in the relationship to the commons have been happening since 70 anyway. And it's beginning to, from my perspective, maybe because I'm looking at it, it's becoming more obvious in many more places, but I feel that things are flourishing and we're entering a kind of a period of it speeding up, whatever it is. Yeah.
Interesting, something similar at a very much smaller scale has happened in Guelph with a silent dance party. And it was part of Louis Blanche, which was, have you heard about this? So, for those of you who don't know, there's two DJs. I was the DJ at for one of the hours this past, just a couple weeks ago. And it's this, but it's smaller scale, and everything's silent. So, two DJs broadcasting to different frequencies. It's put on by the local radio station here on campus. So the idea is that folks have a Walkman, still say Walkman, a radio and they can choose the frequency and then they dance. So, and there's some really interesting interplay between when you're dancing and you don't know which one is playing, which DJ is playing the music, or as a DJ, you're not aware who's dancing to the music that you're playing. And some people, I'm sure, are there and they're not listening to anything, and they're dancing, and or they're listening to their own stuff and they're dancing. And it was interesting because it's so much like this, but then it's kind of removing that connection, that audio connection that's visible, and we have, you know, there are people walking by, the drunkards, the drunken frosh students, saying, "You guys are crazy, it's surreal." It's wild. So I want to talk to you more about this because I'm.
Yeah, it's interesting you should mention that, because I was talking with some composers last week about that event, and that's fantastic. I definitely want to chat more about this.
Yeah.
Because I think there's some, I feel like there's massive kind of similarities coming from a central concern, but the implications of the delivery are profoundly different.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And after seeing I can imagine the Frosh Dude thing, having seen the Frosh Dudes get swallowed up by the Decentralized Dance Party, and changed. They go from to a half hour later, they're like, this is great, this is fantastic.
Yeah, well, and at the same time, just down the road, was it the potato mashers?
Yeah, mashed potato
Mashed
mashers.
potatoes is kind of traveling, well, you could probably describe it better, traveling mix of musical styles, this kind of marching band. And I looked down the road and the bar was letting out, and they ran smack dab into these potato mashers, and all of a sudden, it was this very energetic kind of drunken man dance, but there's a beautiful mixing of cultures there. Right? I don't know how it ended, because I went home,
Well,
it was like 2:30 in the morning.
And well,
It had a very well.
yeah.
It's interesting to me, I think of the boombox as a way of staking out territory in a situation.
Very much.
So I think of a boombox in a crowded park as the way one person or individual stakes out their territory against the rest of the crowd.
Yeah.
So it's fantastic to see it bring together.
Inverting
park.
that,
It's really a subversive use of the old boombox.
Oh, yeah, and the signs would say no boom boxes, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if they still, they don't say
I
boom
don't think
boxes,
so.
I think, no radios or something.
Yeah, I don't even know if they would anymore.
And people bring their own boomboxes to this, it's not just.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, they can bring their own, yeah, for sure. They have about 100, but there was way more than 100 there, so.
I've got 2 or 3 where only the radio works. It's always the last thing to go.
Yeah, the radio part is it's fantastic, which makes the boombox much less valuable for resale and much easier to get for a party.
Well, there was a bit of a change on campus, I noticed, when I was an undergrad a million years ago. The thing to do would be to get your boombox and put it in the window, and then there'd be a shared experience, either, in your residence room or outside, or whatever it was. And then when everybody moved to a smaller device a personal device with headphones, it changed that kind of community, shared experience. I did away with it, basically.
Yeah, it privatized space in profound ways.
Yeah, that's part of that idea of restricting bodies again, because not never. You almost never see people dancing when they're listening to their iPod, ever. It's like you have to, and it's almost like you feel like you can't, which I hate that. So I want to sit on the bus and listen to music and and it's sometimes I do. But then people always just give you these weird looks. But you have to feel contained but it's weird because you feel like it's even more all you. So you ignore the rest of the world, but at the same time you're conscious of it.
Yeah.
There was that weird dichotomy going on where you are like in your own world, but you're also extremely self-conscious of yourself being in the world.
Right.
Which is the brilliance of this, because it changes that. And people need public space and to be allowed to be outside. And definitely the thing you're saying about youth being like pushed into smaller and smaller spaces is like absolutely true. And that's probably feeds into this whole idea of frosh culture, which has come up so many times during this conversation. Is people have been restricted, and like when you have people coming to their undergrad, And I've been TAing and listening to a bunch of undergrads on the bus the other day, back and forth in Toronto. And people feel unrestricted for the first time. And it causes this massive, like, bomb to explode, right? It's like all of the aggression is like finally out. So by providing people with public space in which to be creative and not just experience creativity, but to be part of that creativity, it gets that energy out.
Yeah, absolutely right. That's the
And
problem.
they're not-
That, I don't think that can be said often enough. The difference between experiencing creativity versus looking at it. Like the difference between actually being a participant, actually playing a role in it, participating versus being a spectator. Being a spectator, of course, you're involved somehow. But being a participant in an event, everybody being part of the Extallation, that there isn't something that they're looking at, that they are the event that's being looked at, they live their experience as a piece of art, and think of their lives as a piece of art, at least for a little bit of time, I think is a profoundly moving, to touch on what you were saying, a profoundly moving thing. Yeah, thanks for noticing that. The other thing, I didn't, in the last question, I should have touched on my male-oriented nature of the presentation. I think I'm trying to come to terms with the impact that the culture that I grew up in, what kind of impact it has on my skin, like how I wear myself, how I move myself in public, my discomfort dancing, and how learning to read my body will provide ways of thinking about my place in the social world, which is not something in an academic setting. Like I said right at the very beginning, I would like to pace around because I think when I move and move when I think. And for somebody like that, and I think many of us are like that, being so disconnected from our physicality and not being able to use our physicality as a mode or as a methodology of acquiring, I think limits the range of range of types of questions and limits the possible answers that we can come up with. And I think not just kind of a phenomenological kind of thing, but an actual visceral relationship with one another, the study of the physical relationships we have with our body and through our body with each other, I think opens up a ton of really challenging and provocative questions. So I'm trying to deal with this from my experience, and I happen to be a man, and I happen to be a white man, and I happen to be a white man teaching at a university, which has a whole, as you know, a whole bag of stuff that's I'm trying to unpack, I guess. So I'm probably, this is probably my process in front of you, and which makes it, social in neat ways. I don't know what it's like to be a woman. But I think I need to learn. And I don't mean that like I can biologically become a woman, but I think we need to begin to start struggling with the idea of gender and subjectivity and the idea of our subjective constructions and the relationship that our biology has with subjective constructions. Don't ask me to unpack that right now. This is, a Judith Butler hangover, perhaps. And I just finished reading a Guattari article called How to Become a Woman, which is not helpful. But I would suggest reading it because it's the French male psychoanalyst in the 80s writing about how to become a woman. It can't be more of a minefield. But he asks really important questions about the possibility of understanding one another and the limits to which one can struggle and strive. And I was humbled by how limited I've allowed my terrain, how many limits I've put on my thinking, and how little adventure, how many kind of terrains and struggles I haven't even begun to explore. So yeah, if you want to be kind of humbled by what we can take on, I mean, that's a really interesting place to start.
Oh, there'd be a lot of feminists who would slap your hands and tell you to just plain stop if you tried to become a woman
Yeah.
as a man. And then frankly, what woman? Which woman?
Any.
Well, but is there some sort of fundamental, like,
And what is a woman?
and you know, do you want to become me when I was a kid? Do you want to become me now?
But that's
Do you
the
know?
question that's asking, it's not,
I'm just saying, I don't know if it's a very fruitful exercise. And we can debate that, but I'm just saying my.
Absolutely,
my
that would be the
feminist
fun part.
instinct is telling me to let it go.
Well, why?
I don't know. I
Why?
don't-
Why should I let it go? Why should I not try? Why should you, can you be a man?
Why would I want to be? No,
Yeah, no, okay, but the, no, they've got that
He
thing,
ain't standing up.
they've got that cardboard thing now.
That's true.
You can get that. You've seen that?
What?
Hiking stores, there's a cardboard
Yeah,
thing that so women could
What?
be
her
standing
and
up.
Does it have to be broken flies?
No, nothing to do with broken fly. But,
I'm sorry, we can stop.
no, but I think it's I don't know, I mean,
I think it's more important, in my opinion, to become receptive to other people's, but not necessarily to try and become them.
okay, become is not the right word.
But it's the
Kind of
title of this article. Become
Yeah,
a woman.
it's the title of his article, but it's just that it's impossible. But it's the subjective terrain of, from a musicologist's point of view, the subjective terrain upon which we locate identity. How's
Little
that?
eyebrows.
So if you play something and it's masculine, it can be identified as masculine or identified as feminine, and we do this all the time in many languages.
Mhm.
What does that mean? Does that mean we're actually engaged in the production of an inherently or essentially masculine or feminine subjectivity? No, I would say no immediately. But we're engaged in the performance of subjective space. And is that what art is about? Is it about creating a provocation to understand or get close to what it means to be something that you're not?
As much fun as this is, I think Mark had a question.
Oh, sorry.
I have one question, and I know there's another question.
Okay.
And this is totally in a different realm,
Gotcha.
but we had touched on it earlier, and the question of sustained impact, right? And you said you hadn't interviewed enough people to determine what kind of impact this is having, whether political or apolitical or
Yeah.
whatnot. And I'm wondering if these events, because they're somewhat exclusive in the sense that only certain cities can get it with a certain amount of people coming, and it's also temporal, does that actually inhibit the possibility of some sort of sustained impact? Because people are thinking of it as like a dream, as surreal, as this thing that happens only once or once in their lifetime.
Yeah.
How does that, the structure of the entire event, does that actually, would you say it might actually limit the possibility of a sustained impact? Or ways that people can walk away from that experience and say, I want to feel the same way I felt that day when I go to work tomorrow.
This gets into a long chapter length answer that I'm going to boil down with what I call the coefficient of the wild. I believe that drawing from some deep ecology folks like Snyder, Bakhtin, Roble in the World, the idea of the carnival, the carnivalesque, as that experience of wildness, something that comes up I think more productively in Snyder's Practice of the Wild, and Michael Tausig's Primitivism, Colonialism, Wildness, and something or other. The idea of wildness as a terrain, an actual kind of experiential terrain, provides the opportunity for transformation. What I'm calling the coefficient of the wild is the amount of that wildness that we have access to. And I feel that the DDP, the happenings, so many things in jazz, so much stuff emerges out of the creation of wild spaces, that I think sustained impact will only exist insofar as we can maintain a certain coefficient of the wild in life. Which seems very easy until you start getting into the nuts and bolts of actually how do you create a wild space. And once you start creating wild space, it undermines itself. So, I don't know, but I can say that it'll remain productive so long as we can find wild space in which to have this experience. And what I'm most excited about is that we've stopped looking to nature for wild space and started looking into the cities for wild space. So we're beginning to make that what I think is going to be ultimately a very healthy transformation of looking inside for the coefficient of the wild instead of outside, looking into ourselves instead of looking to the other, which I think Orientalism is part of. I think Orientalism is a process of making a wild terrain. And this is something Michael Taussig gets into as an anthropologist. The relationship that people, the production of wildness and the opportunity that Orientalism provided for the creation of wildness at home, right, with the coefficient of the wild. I think we're beginning to invert that, and I think we're beginning to find the wildness inside our kind of urban spaces, perhaps. And my hope is that we're able to cultivate the coefficient of the wild in deep in ourselves, and that we use that space as the space from which to explore our relationship to the world. And I think it's that space that we recognize in children that we discipline. And we through the process of pedagogy, and this is how it connects to my pedagogical work, we effectively and regimentally limit the wild, so that by the time we get to adolescence, really, the struggle becomes very extreme. And I believe contemporary social life and the issues that since the 1940s, 1950s that we begin to notice with young people is connected to the reduction of wild space. And that kind of that youthful revolution is really kind of the last gasp of trying to find that wild space that I think ultimately kind of gets snuffed out and leads to, as Harvey would say, leads to neurosis, right? In unhealthy social relationships. So maintaining the coefficient of the wild, whatever that means, that's my best guess right now. Yeah.
It strikes me that there's a real connection with what you were just saying to the idea of the three ecologies, of maintaining a healthy ecology in your own mind, where the wildness doesn't take over to the point where there's no structure anymore, but where the wildness breathes life into things.
Yeah.
And then also what you said about children reminds me of something that I came across a TED presentation recently about just smiling. And apparently ordinary healthy children will smile upwards of 400 times a day. And just this last week I've been at a number of dance rehearsals. And it struck me I haven't seen adults smiling as much for a long time as I have in this last week.
Interesting.
Because they're allowing themselves to be physically free, and they just will smile because they feel like smiling.
Yeah. Absolutely. And yeah, well said.
There's never running. I know I've been around my daughter when I know you just do end up smiling, not because she's inherently entertaining, because let's face it, she's not all the time, but they react to a smile. They react to that warmth, and it's this feedback loop that's so refreshing and just energizing in a way that nothing else is, because in the simplicity of just receiving positive energy and giving it and not being afraid. I have to say it's fascinating to watch her even in daycare, where they're starting to contain the wild, and there's a part of me, it breaks my heart in a way to see her have to sit down with everyone else and cross her legs just like everybody else and do all these things. And I know in some way I keep thinking it's important because I do want her to socialize, I mean, it's a process that's so hard to watch anyway. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Fantastic presentation.
Thank you very
Thank you
much
very
for
much.
coming. It was really
Good night, everyone.
nice questions. Thank you.
Do you almost wonder if we should adjourn?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm just
totally.
wondering if there's any other questions, and if not, just to quickly plug the rest of the reading series dates. Our next meeting will be October 14th at the Guelph Public Library. The handouts are here, so everyone can take one and remember the date.
And thank you for doing this. This is a great opportunity to really explore this developing work. Thanks. It's great.
Thank you for your time.
A pleasure.